Imagine you're a simple farmer and you don't have any animals to use in order to help you farm. So all the energy is going to be yours in terms of doing the work. You know that if it takes a certain amount of energy to plant the food and do all the work in order to grow the food, but you're not able to get at least that much energy back in calories, then you would eventually die because you can't continue to grow food at a caloric deficit indefinitely. You need a certain amount of calories in order to sustain. And when you have that much, and that's where you live, essentially, what you put in is what you get out, that is called subsistence farming, where your input is essentially the same as your output. And you don't change really in terms of your lifestyle. You're basically stuck there because you don't have any more energy to do anything else. You don't have leisure time. You don't have time to go on vacation. You don't have money to do those things, but you don't have the ability to do anything else because just living, just being alive takes calories. It takes energy just to be alive, let alone actually try to do something difficult. And when you're talking about people who live like this, everything's pretty difficult. Things that we take for granted as not dangerous can be extremely dangerous to people who live on that caloric edge. I might get sick. I stay home for a few days or whatever it takes, and then take the medicine, do what I need to do, and then go on about my business. But anybody who is at that level where everything they're doing is just barely keeping them alive, they don't have any room to fail. So if you have a bad season, if something bad happens, break your leg, break an arm, get sick, it's life-threatening. So if you then do something like domesticate an animal and you use an ox to help you plow a field or something to that effect, then what you can do is effectively multiply your production so that when you input in a certain amount of calories in work, you can grow a lot of food and then get back more than what you put in. And that difference is called a profit. That is, in essence, all that a profit is. And you can think of it in caloric terms, but it can be in a lot of different ways. You don't necessarily have to be a farmer in order to make a profit. That's not the case at all. But it's easy to understand. It's easier to visualize. We understand what a calorie is. We all eat, we all have food, we all know what it feels like to be hungry. And we know that if you don't eat, eventually you would die. You have to eat. Being alive takes calories. So taking in food is not optional. So what that means is, unless you want to live at that level where you don't go anywhere and you can't do anything, then you want to make a profit. You have to make a profit. If you go the other way, if you input in more than what you get back, that is called a loss or a deficit. And that may not kill you, but over time, that's not sustainable. That's not something you can continue to do. You would eventually die. So in economic terms, Profit is about life. It's not optional, really. If you want to grow, if you want to do things with your life, you have to profit. If you don't, if you go the other way, it's towards death. It's a negative. It's not good. You can't just lose things. You can't do things at a deficit indefinitely and there's no consequence. So, without getting into money, without dragging that in yet, which I will, and it's very simple, but without doing anything with that, profit and loss is about life and death. And if you include any number of people, that doesn't change. It's the same for one person as it is the same for a billion. So, when you understand that, you can get rid of a lot of the things that graphs and money and talking about big numbers does to your view of what economics is. All that stuff is nice, it's useful, but it just kind of clouds the real conception of what's going on underneath. It makes it very hard to understand. Understanding economics is not about the numbers and the graphs and CPI and all of the other things you could look at. So once we start including other people, then we want to start talking about money. And money is really simple. If you want to understand this, then all you need to do is understand this. And most people know what this is. It's just an IOU. If you know what an IOU is, then you know what any form of money is. So when it comes to the value of money, what it's all about, it's really just a promise. Without the promise, without at least two people having something they want from each other, there's really nothing there. There's nothing of value. If I wrote an IOU and I gave it to you, and in return I asked you to give me something valuable, something you had, whatever it is, you're not going to want this unless it means something. The paper itself is not what you're after. That's not really valuable. When you deal with somebody else and you promise them something, what's valuable isn't that you can remember what the promise is. That has a value. That actually does have a value. Remembering, that's why we write IOUs, because we can't remember everything. But fundamentally, the remembering is the remembering of something to be done, something to be gained. So the kind of fundamental value of an IOU is the ability for the purpose or for the person making the promise to pay it back. So if somebody makes you an IOU, you're going to accept that or not, depending on whether or not you trust them to fulfill their promise. If you, or if they take, let's say, for example, a can of Coke, and they say, you give me the can of Coke and I will give you $1, or no, I don't want to use $1. I'll give you, I don't know, let's say a bag of chips later, tomorrow. Now you can accept the offer or reject it, but what hinges on that is whether or not you think they are going to give you that bag of chips later. If you don't think that's going to happen, then you won't accept it, assuming you want the bag of chips. So trust in that person is fundamental to the value of that IOU. Without the trust and whatever they're promising, this wouldn't mean anything. This has no value without the material value, whether that's a good or a service, and the trust in the people that are making it to pay it. So when we look at any other form of money, and there's a lot of different forms of money, the form does add some different capabilities, some different values to the actual promise. One of the things that makes this useful is that it's real easy to deal with. They're light, they're flexible. There are properties of money that make good money. But there are things that make money bad. And there are certain forms of money that are better in some ways, and some forms are better in others. But without the actual good or service and the trust that you're going to actually receive that, it doesn't matter what form it takes, it doesn't mean anything. So if you're stuck on a deserted island and you have the option between all of the money in the world in whatever form you think it is best, whether it's gold or dollars or silver or Bitcoin, whatever, doesn't matter what it is. And then your other option is a bowl of rice. You're going to take the bowl of rice because that actually has more value than all of the money in the world, because the money doesn't actually do anything without the actual good or service and the trust, the honesty that you can access those things or that you'll get those things. So there's no way to have this be intrinsically valuable. That's not possible. So that leads to a few things. One of them is when you have a transaction, when you're dealing with somebody, when you're trading with somebody, if you go to somebody else and you want to make them an IOU, you're asking for something, you're going to provide something, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. If you do it honestly, if you do it with consent, then it's good. If the person trusts you and they think it's going to benefit them, they'll make the trade. And everything's good. You're getting something you want, they're getting something they want. Now imagine if a third party, somebody else, could come in between that transaction, in between that relationship, and say, I get to write these things. I don't have anything to offer. You don't have to trust me. None of that matters, because I have a gun. I have the use of force. And I'm going to write these, and you're going to pay for them. So what a government does is it comes into economics, into transactions, into our daily lives, and it says you can only use one form of money. This, essentially, you can only use this, and the way this gets value, because the government doesn't produce anything, they're not a producer, they don't actually make anything. They have a certain and necessary role, but it's not making things. So the government comes in and they define whatever the currency is going to be. And every government does this. So they say, okay, you're going to use this, but why would we use it? It has no value. There's nothing really behind it. So what they do is they say, you have to return these to us, the government, or you go to jail. And if you resist, you'll be shot. Don't try and fight the cops if they want to take you to jail. So it's not optional. It's not, I don't want to pay taxes. I don't want to, use this. That's not an option. People have gone to jail. People have been fined. We know there's plenty of history of people trying to get away from this. Or, whatever currency it is, which in different countries is going to be different ones controlled by their government. So the government essentially needs to survive as well. It's constituted of people and they do things. They need to actually gain goods and services themselves. So the way in which they do this is they put these into the economy. They say you can't use anything else. And the value, the way this is valuable is if you don't return it to them, you go to jail. So you have to chase these. Now there's a bit of a caveat to that, and it's if you produce anything, then you have to pay for that production. So if you're homeless, if you don't produce much or anything, then they don't really care about you because you have nothing to take. But if you make something, then you're getting paid in the currency, you're chasing after that currency, you're trying to get more of these paper things because you have to pay taxes on what you produce. So that's how the government survives. That's how the government is able to keep going. Because if the government did what it did and they said, okay, it's optional if you want to pay us. It's optional if you want to give us any money. Well, nobody would really give them much of anything, if anything at all. That's not how any government that does what most governments do, well, really all governments do, would survive. They can't do that. That's like a mugger coming up to you wherever and saying, okay, you're going to give me your wallet if you want to. No, they're not asking. They're telling you you're going to do it or you're going to get hurt. So that's how governments stay alive. That's how they operate. They have to take from the people who produce. But there's a problem, because the kind of government that does that is the kind of government that's going to regulate, it's going to control what you can do, it's going to tell you how to live, it's going to do all those kind of things. But those kinds of things are antithetical to production. So, through the course of American history, we were freest in most ways in the beginning of America, essentially. In terms of regulation, telling you what you could do, all those kind of things. Those regulations just grow, basically. It's very hard to get rid of them. It mostly just goes in one direction. It's more laws. Well, they're not really laws, they're regulations. more government agencies, all of that. All of that gets piled on and piled on. So in the beginning of American history, it was a lot easier to produce because there were very few limitations on what you could do. So we were able to produce a lot and grow a lot. Production is growth. It's really the same thing. So we were able to do that. And over time, a lot of things, a lot of regulation has been added. So the government grows, it wants more. The bigger it is, the more it needs to survive. So it's going to take more. So through history, we've essentially been able to grow as much or faster than what the government took in. But that doesn't really just go on forever, because the regulations, the amount of restrictions there are to our ability to produce is so great at this point that we can't do much in terms of survival. They're taking more than what we could give them. And so we're at this breaking point where the government is so large and we have almost just some ridiculously restrictive regulations in terms of what we can do, that it's impossible for people to just live their life. So this is being destroyed. It's lost 98% of its value, something like that, since its inception. And it's why they can't just print money. It's why they have to collect taxes. Because one of the things that they want to do, one of the things that they are doing, they've done a lot, is try to solve problems they create by printing money. Printing money. And that can't happen because this isn't what is valuable. It's what you do with the money. It's what you can get for the money that's valuable. So just printing more of these doesn't increase the number of goods or services. So again, if you're on a deserted island and you have a bowl of rice, and I give you one of these, you might be able to say that the value of the bowl of rice is $1. Just to super simplify things. If I give you 1 billion of these, does that make the bowl of rice get any bigger? No, it's the same size. All you've done is essentially diluted the number of dollars it takes to equal one bowl of rice. So when you print money, again, print money, it doesn't actually make things better because it hurts people who have these and it helps people who are in debt, denominated in whatever they're printing. So when you save, what you're doing is you are saving that profit so you can use it to do other things and distance yourself from bad places, like getting kicked out of your house or whatever the case may be. In today's terms, we're not subsistence farmers, so the distance we have to that kind of lifestyle is pretty far, but heading in that direction isn't fun. We don't want to be there. So you save money in order to use that profit in order to be more productive, to do more things. So when you save money and then the government prints more, the value of any single dollar goes down. And then it rewards the people who just consume but they don't produce. They can spend lots of money, which anybody can do. Any idiot can spend money. That's not hard. That is not complicated at all. It's not difficult. Nobody's trying to figure out how to spend money. But everybody wants money, and very few people are actually really productive, are entrepreneurial, actually do things that make money. That's difficult. That's hard. But it's really, really important. And it's a really good thing. It's how we get all the nice things. We don't get nice things from people who just consume. People think like this. People think, and the government thinks like this, and economists, smart economists, think that an economy is essentially or primarily consumption. And we've been called a consumption economy. We've been called a consumer economy. But that's just stupid. You can't have an economy of consumption. Somebody has to make the things you consume. And it's really hard to produce when you're not free to produce. So when these are worthless, which is coming very soon, what's it worth? What can you get for it? Well, not much, because your ability to get them is limited by your ability to essentially be in bed with the government. And then what you can actually get for them, all the products, goods and services, are dwindling. And a great example of this is a number of products that we've essentially had limited access to, such as N95 masks. So you have to, not optional, you have to have a free market. And it's another one of those things that's stupid. Because to even say free market is redundant. There's really no such thing as a market that isn't free. If you have a market, that's where people can trade freely, deal with each other, not by force. If I come to you and I say, you give me that, and I don't kill you, that's not a market. There's no freedom there. There's no exchange. It's just you doing what I tell you. That's not an economy. That's just slavery. And another thing I hear a lot, and from people who think they understand how markets work or are defenders of capitalism, they'll say crony capitalism. That is not a real thing. That is cronyism is the opposite of capitalism. You can't modify capitalism with something that is contradictory to what capitalism is. I should probably define capitalism because a lot of people don't know what that is. That's really simple. When you remove force from our interactions so that we can trade freely, that's capitalism. It's the protection of individual rights. When you do that, when you create a government, which is their one role, protect your rights, when you create a government that protects the rights of the individual, they can then act freely, they can trade freely, and you will get a market. So when you introduce force into that, that is no longer capitalism. Because it's not capitalism if I'm forcing you to do something. And when you understand that, then you understand that we don't have capitalism. You might be able to say to some extent we do, in a delimited form, in a very restricted aspect, but that's kind of true of almost any economy. And essentially, every economy is a mixed economy. It has some freedom and some force. The more free you are, the better you're going to do. The more you can produce, the more you can trade, all of that good stuff. The more controlled you are, the less you produce. And there's plenty of historic examples of this, where governments who destroy the rights of the individual, who control the individual, who dictate, tell them what to do, what kind of job they can have, what kind of things they can own, all of those kind of things. When they do that, and to the extent that they do that, they destroy a human's ability to live, to produce. And so you see examples like, Mao in China, the Great Leap Forward, tens of millions of people dead, USSR, lots and lots of dead people from starvation, and of course, throwing them in gulags, concentration camps, enslavement to some effect. A lot of dead people. So I've kind of been all over the place with understanding what money is. But if you understand an IOU, its value is based on the trust and what you're going to get. We can't trust the government. They shouldn't have control of the money, whatever form it is, because it's always going to be abused. So there's no good end to the government that has control of the monetary system. That's never ended well for any country in history. They always fail. The reason gold is so good as a form of money, it has the material traits that make it effective, but it's not controlled. It's not controlled by any one government. It's anybody who can dig it out of the ground. So nobody gets to come into a transaction and say, you have to use my form of money and then you have to give it back to me or I'm going to hurt you. That's not the case with gold. So you don't have all the problems you have with gold, or with all these other forms of money compared to gold or silver and the new up-and-comer is Bitcoin. So if you want to fix the economy, if you want to fix all the problems the government is creating, and then people blame on capitalism, you have to get them out of making economic decisions. That's not their job. They have absolutely zero role in economics. They have nothing to do with economics and a whole lot of other things. But you remove them from that. Until that happens, they're always going to screw things up. And of course, there's plenty of corruption. There's plenty of lobbying. And lobbying is another interesting topic I want to make a video about, because people don't really understand why that happens or what's going on there. People try to get rid of it. They want to get rid of money in politics. And the problem isn't the money. The problem is that our rights are up for sale. You know, regulations. If you want to be free, you have to get those changed. And the best way to do that is not to vote. It's to go to the government. So that's another video for another time. But hopefully that clears some things up. Hopefully that makes sense of what money is and what profit is and why it's important. You can't get away from it. You need a profit. You need to transact with other people. So you have to use some form of money, because this gives us a centralized point of value. Because one of the basic economic problems is you have something I want, but I don't have something you want. So it's hard to transact. It's hard to deal with each other. But when you have a form of money that its sole purpose is money, its sole purpose is to be valued and traded, it is extremely, extremely important to a functioning economy. So, if you have any questions, let me know. I'll probably have to do this again. I'll probably make more videos, answer more questions, clear some more things up. And hopefully educate some more people, because it's really simple. It's really not complicated. And that's the way for a lot of things in life. You've been extremely miseducated on all these important things. So more about the government, more about money, more about what the government's supposed to do, and a whole lot of things they're not supposed to do. And I think that's it.